You mentioned Bolivia.
Mhm.
What's the connection between culture and language? Uh, you've also mentioned that much of our study of language comes from WEIRD, weird people, Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So when you study like remote cultures, such as around the Amazon jungle, what can you learn about language?
So that term "weird" is from Joe Henrich. He's at Harvard. He's a Harvard evolutionary biologist, and so he works on lots of different topics. And he basically was pushing that observation that we should be careful about the inferences we want to make when we're talking in psychology or yeah, mostly in psychology, I guess, about humans. If we're talking about, undergrads at MIT and Harvard, those aren't the same, right?
Hmm.
These aren't the same things. And so if you want to make inferences about language, for instance, there's a lot of other kinds of languages in the world than English and French and Chinese, and so maybe for language we care about how culture, because cultures can be very, I mean, of course English and Chinese cultures are very different, but hunter gatherers are much more different in some ways. And so if culture has an effect on what language is, then we kind of want to look there as well as looking. It's not like the industrialized cultures aren't interesting. Of course they are. But we want to look at non-industrialized cultures as well. And so I worked with two. I've worked with the Chimani, which are in Bolivia and the Amazon, both in the Amazon in these
Hmm.
cases. And there are so-called farmer foragers, which is not hunter-gatherers. It's sort of one up from hunter-gatherers in that they do a little bit of farming as well, a lot of hunting as well, but a little bit of farming. And the kind of farming they do is the kind of farming that I might do if I ever were to grow like tomatoes or something in my
Hmm.
backyard. It's not like big field farming. It's just a farming for a family. A few things you do that. And so that's the kind of farming they do. Um, and the other group I've worked with are the Piraha, which are in also in the Amazon and happen to be in Brazil. And that's with a guy called Dan Everett,
Hmm.
who is a linguist, anthropologist who actually lived and worked he was a missionary actually initially back in the 70s, working with trying to translate languages so they could teach them the Bible, teach them Christianity.
What can you say about that?
Yeah. So the two groups I've worked with, the Chimani and the Piraha, are both isolate languages, meaning there's no known connected languages at all. They're just like on
Oh,
their own.
cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of those, and most of the isolates occur in the Amazon or in Papua New Guinea, and these places where the world has sort of stayed still for long enough, and there aren't earthquakes, there aren't well, certainly no earthquakes in the Amazon jungle, and the climate isn't bad, so you don't have droughts. And so, in Africa, you've got a lot of moving of people
Hmm.
because there's drought problems, and so you get a lot of language contact when people have to, if you got to move
Hmm.
because you got no water, then you got to get going, and then you run into contact with other tribes, other groups. In the Amazon, that's not the case, and so people can stay there for hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of years, I guess. And so these groups have, and the Chimani and the Piraha are both isolates in that, and I guess they've just lived there for ages and ages with minimal contact with other outside groups. And so I mean, I'm interested in them because they are. I mean, in these cases, I'm interested in their words. I would love to study their syntax, their orders of words, but I'm mostly just interested in how languages, are connected to um, their cultures in this way. And so with the Piraha, sort of most interesting, I was working on
Hmm.
number information. And so the basic idea is I think language is invented. Right? That's what I get from the words here is that I think language is invented. We talked about color earlier. It's the same idea. So that what you need to talk about with someone else is what you're going to invent words for.
Hmm.
Okay. And so we invent labels for colors that I need, not that I can see, but that things I need to tell you about so that I can get objects from you or get you to give me the right objects. And I just don't need a word for teal or a word for aquamarine in the Amazon jungle for the most part, because I don't have two things which differ on those colors. I just don't have that. And so numbers are really another fascinating source of information here, where you might, naively, I certainly thought that all humans would have words for exact counting.
Mm-hmm.
And the Piranha don't. Okay, so they don't have any words for even one. There's not a word for one in their language, and so there's certainly not a word for 2, 3, or 4. So that kind of blows people's minds off. And
that's blowing my mind.
That's pretty weird.
How are you going to ask? I want 2 of those.
You just don't, and so that's just not a thing you can possibly ask in the Piranha. It's not possible. There's no words for that. So here's how we found this out. Okay, so it was thought to be a one-to-many language. There are 3 words for quantifiers for sets. But people had thought that those meant 1, 2, and many. Mm-hmm. But what they really mean is few, some, and many. Many is correct. It's few, some, and many. And so the way we figured this out, nice. This is kind of cool, is that we gave people. We had a set of objects. Okay, and these happen to be spools of thread. Doesn't really matter what they are. Identical objects. And when I sort of start off here, I just give you one of those and say, what's that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're a Piranha speaker, and you tell me what it is. And then I give you 2 and say, what's that? And nothing's changing in this set except for the number, okay? And then I just ask you to label these things. We just do this for a bunch of different people. And frankly, I did this task.
This is fascinating.
And it's a little bit weird. So they say the word that we thought was 1, it's few, but for the first one. And then maybe they say few, or maybe they say some for the second. And then for the third or the fourth, they start using the word many for the set. And then 5, 6, 7, 8, I go all the way to 10. Mm-hmm. and it's always the same word. And they look at me like I'm stupid because they told me what the word was for 6, 7, 8. And I'm going to continue asking them at 9 and 10. I'm like, I'm sorry. They understand that I want to know their language. That's the point of the task, is like I'm trying to learn their language. And so that's okay. But it does seem like I'm a little slow because they already told me what the word for many was, 5, 6, 7, and I keep asking. So it's a little funny to do this task over and over. We did this with the guy called, Dan was our translator. He's the only one who really speaks Piranha fluently. He's a good bilingual for a bunch of languages, but also in English and Piranha. And then a guy called Mike Frank was also a student with me down there. He and I did these things. And so you do that, okay, and everyone does the same thing. All we asked like 10 people, and they all do exactly the same labeling for 1 up. And then we just do the same thing down on like random order. Actually, we do some of them up, some of them down first, okay? And so we do, instead of 1 to 10, we do 10 down to 1. And so I give them 10, 9. At 8, they start saying the word for some. And then when you get to 4, everyone is saying the word for few, which we thought was 1. So it's the context determined what that quantifier they used was. So it's not a count word. They're not count words. They're just approximate words.
And they're going to be noisy when you interview a bunch of people. The definition of few, and there's going to be a threshold in the context.
I don't know what that means. That's going to depend on the context. I think it's true in English too, right? If you ask an English person what a few is, I mean, that's going to depend completely on the context.
And that might actually be at first hard to discover. Yeah. Because for a lot of people, the jump from 1 to 2 will be few. Right, so it's a jump.
Yeah, it might be. It might still be there. Yeah,
that's fascinating. That's fascinating. The numbers don't present themselves.
So the words aren't there, and then we did these other things. Well, if they don't have the words, can they do exact matching kinds of tasks? Can they even do those tasks? And the answer is sort of yes and no. And so yes, they can do them. So here's the tasks that we did. We put out those spools of thread again. Okay, so maybe I put like 3 out here, and then we gave them some objects, and those happen to be uninflated red balloons. It doesn't really matter what they are. It's just they're a bunch of exactly the same thing, and it was easy to put down right next to these spools of thread. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so then I put out 3 of these, and your task was to just put 1 against each of my 3 things. And they could do that perfectly. So, I mean, I would actually do that. It was a very easy task to explain to them because I did this with this guy, Mike Frank, and he would be I'd be the experimenter telling him to do this and showing him to do this. And then we just do what he did, copy him. I didn't have to speak Piranha except for know what copy him, do what he did is all we had to be able to say. And then they would do that just perfectly. And so we'd move it up. We'd do some sort of random number of items up to 10. And they basically do perfectly on that. They never get that wrong. I mean, that's not a counting task, right?
Mhm.
That is just a match. You just put one against. It doesn't matter how many. I don't need to know how many there are there to do that correctly. And they would make mistakes, but very, very few, and no more than MIT undergrads. Just gonna
Got
say,
it.
like there's no, these are low stakes. So you make
So
mistakes.
counting is not required to complete the matching
That's
test.
right. Not at all. Okay. And so that's our control. And this guy, a guy had gone down there before and said that they couldn't do this task, but I just don't know what he did wrong there, because they can do this task perfectly well. And I can train my dog to do this task. So of course they can do this task. And so, it's not a hard task. But the other task that was sort of more interesting is so then we do a bunch of tasks where you need some way to encode the set. So one of them is just I just put a opaque sheet in front of the things. I put down a set of these things, and I put an opaque sheet down, and so you can't see them anymore. And I tell you, do the same thing you were doing before, right? And it's easy if it's 2 or 3. It's very easy. But if I don't have the words for 8, it's a little harder. Like maybe with practice. Well, no.
Because you have to
For
count.
for us, it's easy because we just count them. It's just so easy to count them. But they can't count them because they don't count. They don't have words for this thing, and so they would do approximate. It's totally fascinating. So they would get them approximately right. After 4 or 5. Because you can basically you always get 4 right. 3 or 4. That's something we can visually see, but after that you kind of have it's an approximate number. And so then and there was a bunch of tasks we did, and they all failed. Failed. They did approximate after 5 on all those tasks. And it kind of shows that the words, you kind of need the words, to be able to do these kinds of tasks.
Well, there's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing there, because if you don't have the words, then maybe they'll limit you in the kind of like a little baby Einstein there won't be able to come up with a counting task. You know what I mean? Like the ability to count enables you to come up with interesting things, probably.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, you develop counting because you need it, but then once you have counting, you can probably come up with a bunch of different inventions, like how to, I don't know, what kind of thing. They do matching really well for building purposes, building some kind of hut or something like this. So it's interesting that language is a limiter on what you're able to do.
Yeah. Here, language is the words. Here is the words. Like the words for exact count is the limiting factor here. They just don't have them.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
That limit is also a limit on the society of what they're able to build.
That's going to be true. Yeah. So it's probably, we don't know. This is one of those problems with the snapshot of just current languages, is that we don't know what causes a culture to discover / invent a counting system. But the hypothesis is, the guess out there is something to do with farming. So if you have a bunch of goats and you want to keep track of them, and you have 17 goats, and you go to bed at night and you get up in the morning, boy, it's easier to have a count system to do that. If I have, and that's an abstraction over a set, so that I don't have people often ask me when I tell them about this kind of work, they say, well, don't they have kids? Don't they have a lot of children? I'm like, yeah, they have a lot of children. And they do. They often have families of 3 or 4 or 5 kids. And they go, well, don't they need the numbers to keep track of their kids? And I always ask the person who says this, like, do you have children? And the answer is always no, because that's not how you keep track of your kids. Yeah. You care about their identities. It's very important to me when I go, I think I have 5 children. It doesn't matter which. It matters which 5. It's like if you replaced one with someone else, I would care. A goat, maybe not, right? That's the kind of point. It's an abstraction. Something that looks very similar to the one wouldn't matter to me, probably.
But if you care about goats, you're going to know them actually individually also.
Yeah, you will.
Cows and goats, if that's the source of food and milk and all that kind of stuff, you're going to actually
You're
really
absolutely right.
care.
But I'm saying it is an abstraction such that you don't have to care about their identities to do this thing fast. That's the hypothesis, not mine. From anthropologists who are guessing about where words for counting came from, is from farming, maybe.